We're continuing on with our NHL offseason plan series, taking a look at the fifth best team from the NHL's regular season, the Washington Capitals. What moves will they make to get ready for next year and try to chase another Stanley Cup? We'll discuss all that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, we're continuing on with our offseason plan series. We only have a few teams left. We're on to the number 5th ranked team from the regular season, the Washington Capitals. We're going to recap their season, take a look at their cap space, analyze any contracts that are coming due, and see what moves make sense for them this offseason as they prepare for next year. So stay tuned for the remaining few videos in this series. We're almost there to wrap things up here over the next couple of days. Now, first let's start by recapping the 1920 season for the Washington Capitals. Now, as you can see on the screen here, the Caps finished with a pretty strong record of 41, 20, and 8, getting over 90 points here, so clearly a pretty strong regular season. They scored 240 goals, allowing 215, giving them a plus 25 rating. Power play was, not too bad, but not fantastic either, 19.4 for 17th best. The PK was 82.6% for 6th best. So penalty killing and defense was pretty solid. As much as their offense was good, the power play could stand to be a little bit better and has been much better in the past. Of course, at the end of that, we saw them go into the return to play in the NHL bubble system in the 2014 format, and they really didn't do all that well. And there was a lot of talk that the Caps just were not a team that was overly focused and really interested, wanting to be there. There's a lot of stories about them having a lot of fun and not really focusing so much on the game. So we'll see if there's any truth to that. I'm not sure what we'll hear more about those stories, but there were some inside reporters kind of telling stories like that, saying that they just didn't feel that the Caps were really in it. So I'm not sure if that had an impact on their play on the ice, because it certainly would if those are true for sure. Now, of course, they also replaced head coach Todd Reirden, who was let go after the season was over. He's already been rehired in Pittsburgh as an assistant coach. Of course, he worked for the Penguins before. Reirden was with the Capitals for a few years before that, leading up to before Barry Trotz was let go. So it's kind of odd, in my opinion, how they didn't want to pay Trotz the big money to stay after bringing him a Stanley Cup. He leaves town. Reirden comes in. That doesn't work out, and they immediately said they needed an experienced coach. And they hired Peter Laviolette, who they're paying substantial money to, who has a great track record in the past. So maybe they should have just kept Barry Trotz and been done with it there. So I guess maybe they had some regrets on that front. I think Reirden's a decent coach, but more of a defensive specialist, and just not sure he's cut out to be a head coach. He's better as an assistant, looks after the defense. At least that's where he's had more of a success so far. So now let's take a look at the cap space for Washington, as well as any expiring contracts for unrestricted or restricted free agents as we head into the offseason. Now, as you can see right now, the Caps have $8.9 million in cap space, and they have 17 players under contract. So you're looking at about 5 or 6 players to get signed to have a full roster. And $8.9 million isn't a ton of money, but obviously that's going to depend on what kind of contracts they have to look after here. So now let's look at those contracts and see who's expiring and they either need to sign or replace. Now, looking at the UFAs, they have some significant players here. We have Ilya Kovalchuk, who many feel that he will not be back in Washington. That was strictly a deadline pickup for a playoff run. Didn't really work the greatest. He's going to move on. Likely goes back to Montreal. You got Braden Holtby, who's been acknowledged here that he's definitely hitting free agency. I don't see a scenario where Washington can retain him. He likely departs as well. And, of course, they have defensemen Radko Gudas and Brendan Dillon. Now, there were reports in the last few days they were trying to clear out a little bit of money to make sure they could bring back Dillon. Gudas, I think they're having some talks, but a little bit less likely that he stays, although I wouldn't completely rule that out at this point in time. On the restricted free agent front, we only have a couple of players, nothing too significant. You have forward Travis Boyd and defenseman Jonas Siegenthaler. So I would fully suspect they'll likely get qualifying offers and remain with the organization. But nothing too crazy for Washington. Ultimately, they have a few holes here they're going to have to look at. So $8.9 million could probably accomplish what they want, depending on what kind of flexibility or internal budgets they might be looking at here. So now let's answer the top burning questions for Washington. What are the main moves that we need to see here as the offseason gets fully into the full swing? Now, first up is goaltending. Obviously, Holtby likely leaves. You have Ilya Samsonov taking over as a starter. Do they go with Phoenix Copley as the backup, who's already under contract for a couple more years at a pretty reasonable rate? Or do they shop the goalie market to find somebody more experienced to kind of come in and mentor Samsonov and be able to play 20 to 30 games a season. Certainly a possibility that they could explore. There's lots of names out there, all kinds. One name that's popped up here lately that could be an option for them would be former Ranger, longtime goaltender Henrik Lundqvist. Now, Lundqvist is a guy who's just got bought out. He's a free agent and likely going to be looking to sign somewhere in a place where he has a shot at a cup, and somewhere where he's probably not going to be demanding too much money because he's going to still be getting paid a decent amount here from his Ranger buyout. So obviously that's certainly an option, but they need to decide if they're going with Copley or a more experienced backup. And to be honest, I think they should go down the route of experience. You have Samsonov, who's really, really good, but very, inexperienced right now. You need to have an option of somebody who can take over and play a decent amount of games, used to have a heavier workload in case he gets hurt. And somebody, if they do have a condensed schedule, you can rely on to kind of platoon with in a 1A, 1B situation. If they, depending on what kind of hockey schedule we get for the 2021 season, and Lundqvist would be a great option. There's other ones out there as well, but certainly a name that's been mentioned recently as possibly being of interest to the Capitals. Now, another big option here on the Capitals' agenda this summer is extending captain Alex Ovechkin. Now, he's entering the final year of his contract. We've already seen lots of reports about negotiations. Originally, we had reports indicating the Capitals were offering around $9.5 to $10 million. Then we've had reports that Alex Ovechkin prefers closer to 12, be up around where Connor McDavid's making, and he apparently is also negotiating his own contract. So, personally, I would not want to I would not want to go into the final year of this deal with the season starting without knowing that you have him locked up. He's a huge part of this team, scores a big chunk of the team's goals, been the franchise's all-time leader in a lot of categories, best player to ever play in the Caps uniform, no doubt. So clearly that's an important piece here, and General Manager Brian McClellan needs to get something figured out, likely looking at a 4 or 5 year extension if they can get the money worked out, likely give him a full no trade as well. So we'll see what happens, but it's certainly an important thing they need to do here before the season gets underway. Of course, they need to look at their blue line as well, with guys like Dylan and Gudas being UFAs and not signed as of right now. We've seen some other turnover on the blue line here in the last couple of years. Obviously, they got John Carlson locked up, big-time contract for a long term, but they could certainly stand to either bring those guys back like Gudas and Dylan, or they need to replace them. I thought Dylan was a great fit there, and I think he would be open to returning, but he is going to have some interest on the open market for sure. There's a fair bit of teams I think could use a guy like him, and there was a fair bit of trade interest when he was in San Jose before he was traded at the deadline as well. So not a given that they return, and if they don't return, the Capitals need to go shopping for some help on the blue line. There will be a fair bit of experienced blue liners out there, but nothing too high end that's going to really break the bank for Washington, because they really can't afford to pay a whole heck of a lot. So we'll see if they can retain Dylan. I know there's interest on both sides, but certainly a big question mark heading into free agency, which is less than a week away. You can't help but wonder as well if there could be some minor shakeup within the forward group. I really don't see anything too significant happening. You've got a lot of your mainstays like Ovechkin, Backstrom, Oshie, Veranda, they're not going anywheres. But I can't help but wonder if we could see some minor shakeups as well, just to get a different mix maybe within your bottom six group, and try to find a way to do that while saving a little bit of money and kind of saving a little bit of cap space too. I'm thinking players like Polnick or Hagelin or Hathaway, like maybe one of those types of players could be moved for some cap saving flexibility as well, because I do have a few prospects that could be knocking on the door to kind of get themselves into the mix here, including Connor McMichael. So they could afford to let somebody go to kind of create a roster spot at the same time and fill that with an ELC to give them a little bit more flexibility. So I think it's quite possible the Caps could bounce back next year, still be a force to be reckoned with. But like I said, I would think for the organization, the items that we just talked about here, especially signing Ovi and sorting out an experienced goaltender work with Samsonov, would be a major help to get this team back on track for next year. Because with Peter Laviolette at the helm, they're going to be a lot more structured and disciplined. That's a given based on how he's coached here in the past. So let me know your thoughts down in the comments and what you expect from the Capitals, and we'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content. And give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.